is encouraging the Taliban to look for other sources of financial support. They are looking forward to China and Russia, some other countries as well. Still, the Taliban government is under pressure to fix Afghanistan's economic problems now, as inflation is soaring. The Afghan country's currency is plummeting and people are desperate as many have lost their jobs and are short of cash. The United Nations World Food Programme has warned that only 5% of households in Afghanistan have enough to eat every day. Half of those surveyed say they have run out of food altogether at least once in the last 2 weeks, so accessing international funds for foreign assistance is key to Afghanistan's survival.
Since the Taliban's takeover, the West has frozen international funds, including assets as Afghanistans could have accessed through the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. According to Mr. Falahi, this is encouraging the Taliban to look for other sources of financial support as they are looking forward to China and Russia, as well as some other countries. Now, the United Nations World Food Programme has warned that only 5% of households in Afghanistan have enough food to eat every day. Off to China now, as Chinese property giant Evergrande has said it's selling a 1.5 billion, which is 1.1 billion pounds stake it owns in a commercial bank as it scrambles to raise money owed to customers, investors and suppliers. The struggling firm to raise $1.5 billion as the debt payment looms. The almost 20% stake in Shijing Bank is being bought by a state-owned asset management company. More of this story.
This comes after Evergrande missed a bond interest payment last week. The cash-strapped company also faces a deadline on Wednesday for another bond interest payment of about $7.5 million. Under the agreement announced to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the proceeds of the sale will be used to pay money Evergrande owes to the Shijing Bank, which is one of the main lenders of the heavily indebted firm. This suggests that Evergrande will not be able to use the money raised by the sale for other purposes, including the interest payment for the overseas bond on Wednesday. The latest payment deadline is being closely watched by investors as they look for the clues on the company's ability to meet its financial obligations. The latest move comes after reports that Beijing has been encouraging state-owned firms and government-backed property developers to buy assets from Evergrande to help it raise the money needed to meet its obligations. The crisis engulfing the world's most indebted property developer has transfixed global markets in recent weeks as the firm struggled to secure funds to service its more than $300 billion of debt. Investors have been watching the crisis unfold as the firm teeters between a messy collapse with potentially far-reaching implications, a managed breakup, or the less likely prospect of a bailout by the Chinese government. The company has lost around 80% of its stock market value over the last year. Last week, Evergrande missed $83.5 million interest payment on an overseas bond, although it did strike an argument with domestic investors over $35.9 million payment, which was also due. Evergrande's shares closed 15% higher in Hong Kong trade on Wednesday. Shijing Bank shares are not public.
The crisis engulfing the world's most indebted property developer has transfixed global markets in recent weeks as the firm struggled to secure funds to service its more than $300 billion of debt. Now, investors have been watching the crisis unfold as the firm teeters between far-reaching implications and a managed breakup or the less likely prospect of a bailout by the Chinese government. The company has lost around 80% of its stock market value over the last year, as last week Evergrande missed an $83.5 million interest payment on an overseas bond, although it did strike an agreement with domestic investors over $35.9 million payment, which was also due. Now, Evergrande shares closed 15% higher in Hong Kong trade on Wednesday as Shijing Bank shares are not publicly traded. All right, now moving on, and lastly, in regards to our business stories across the borders, South African Airways and Kenya Airways have signed a cooperation agreement with a long-term view to create a pan-African airline group. The companies have a long-term plan for a pan-African airline group in the future. More of these reports.
It is not a merger but a partnership that seeks to reorganize Kenyan Airways and South African Airways assets into an ecosystem that will make the South African and Kenyan aviation sector more competitive, Kenya Airways said in a statement. South African Airways said in a separate statement that the pact did not preclude either firm from pursuing commercial cooperation with other carriers and said collaborating would help contain costs. State-owned South African Airways restarted domestic flights last week and this week launches a scaled-down international service to 5 African capitals after its long-standing financial woes were excavated by the COVID-19 pandemic. It exited administration in April thanks to another state bailout. The government has said it will sell 51% stake in the airline to a local consortium. Kenya Airways passenger business has also been severely constrained by COVID-19 and it has focused on cargo to minimize losses. Kenya has plans to renationalize the airline, whose code-share agreement with Air France KLM for Africa-Europe routes ends.
All right, now the aviation sector is among those economic sectors in Africa that have hardly a good time to compete favorably in the world for the last 18 months. And not only in Africa, but also across the world, the aviation sector has always been finding a very huge challenge to see that they rejuvenate themselves in the services. And a few months back, the Kenyan Airways had issues in regards to the payments of their staff members, where the board actually came out and decided that their staff will remain on the cut salary so that by the time the business goes back to pre-pandemic levels, they would resume onto they will actually get a pay rise as the company will be making more profits by 2025 as an estimation comes about. All right, now that brings us to the end of our foreign news updates. When I return, we are discussing more of the education sector in Uganda and in regards to the available markets and what is the state of the online education system in Uganda. Just keep it SMB. I will be right back.